All right. In a previous chapter, we talked a little bit about money and happiness, and I thought I would show you sort of a different angle on this. So, again, they corrected, but this time they corrected it to $2,000. So, from the year 2000. So, when we look at this personal income rising, it's from 1957 in this chart going up to 2005. And so we see personal income rising even more if we start in 1957, correcting it to $2,005. And then we see the percentage of people who are reporting that they're very happy, staying quite stable across that time. Um, so, so when we look at this kind of number and we ask, does money buy happiness? Our first instinct obviously would be to say, well, no, because I mean, we all stayed the same amount happy, even as per capita income has gone up dramatically in the past, what is this, 60 years or something. Oh, wait, I think that's 70 years. Good. I'm a psychologist. I don't do good math. Okay. Let's look at this depiction of happiness and money. Okay. So this is international data. And what we see across the x-axis is gross domestic product per capita. So we don't have like family income or something for every culture. And so what they looked at is the country that the person is coming from. What is the gross domestic product of that country? So like how really honestly, how wealthy is the country is what we're tapping into here. And then along the y-axis is the subjective well-being index. And so this is a measure of how the person perceives their own sense of well-being. All right, so over here in the top right-hand corner, you'll find really high GDP countries like Switzerland, USA, Luxembourg, Norway, right? You see these really high GDP countries over here. On the right side. And then you have lower GDP countries over here on the left side. So, very far left are, Nigeria, Ghana, Indonesia, Vietnam, Kyrgyzstan, Mali, Burma. No, that's Burkina, Zambia, Uganda, Pakistan, Rwanda, right? So you see down the left-hand side, the GDP countries across that are low, those that are higher on the right. And so that's the x-axis. Then as we go along this subjective well-being index, we have, again, one of these sort of, you're either positive or negative. This one, they didn't bother drawing a zero for like sort of a baseline. So you have, negative. Please notice we go way higher on the subjective well index scale than we do low on the subjective well-being scale. So keep that in mind, that, the degree of negative subjective well-being is much smaller, right? The max on our little scale is 4.5 and the minimum is negative 2.25. So much more happiness going on, or subjective well-being going on, than subjective, bad being. What's the opposite of well-being? I don't know if that was a word. Sorry, I cracked myself up. Talking to myself in my own little office, I'm cracking myself up. All right. So what we are noticing is that, first off, there are a lot more lower GDP countries than there are high GDP countries. Okay. But we also notice that the lower GDP countries kind of span the spectrum of subjective well-being scales, right? I mean, Colombia is as high as any of these maximum GDP countries, right? Mexico's up there. Maybe not. I mean, that might be fifth or sixth compared to in subjective well-being compared to some of the really high earning countries. So I mean, there are some high subjective well-being here. Among the high earning countries, you can see that there are some lower subjective well-being going on, but basically what you have is it's kind of a curvilinear relationship, honestly. So they had to put a curved line in here instead of a straight Pearson's correlation straight line. But what they're showing is that it does go up to the right, that as countries have higher GDP, we tend to see higher subjective well-being indices. And as they have a lower GDP, we see on average a lower subjective well-being index. Okay, so having said that, there are some factors that are taken into the subjective well-being index that may moderate our interpretation of the role of income and subjective well-being. One of the big things that gets you some points as a country as far as subjective well-being is if there is access to free health care. So when you're coming from a low-income culture, there may not be that. And so you end up with, you don't get those points kind of thing. I mean, it's not just purely people answering scale scores and saying, oh, yes, I feel good. I feel like I pursue pleasure or any of those kinds of things. It's more country by country comparison of, how people are living, how much depression's in the culture, like these kinds of things. And so it's not quite maybe exactly what you think of when you think happiness, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. It's a combination. It's called an index because lots of things are being combined. And so you have life satisfaction, happiness, using all available surveys conducted between 1995 and 2007 to make these dots of subjective well-being. And so some of these countries and cultures had ups and downs in that period of time that may have had an impact on their subjective well-being or their gross domestic product. And so these are things to just keep in mind whenever you see any kinds of comparisons between countries. A lot of times they're murky and not as clear-cut as the dots imply. One of the things that you might have noticed is that there are these like shapes around them and saying this is ex-communist, this is Latin America. They didn't characterize, Western Europe or something. But I think they wanted to sort of highlight that those countries that had been formerly part of the USSR, or I guess affiliated at least, tend to have lower subjective well-being, unless apparently you're Kyrgyzstan, right? Which is where you have very low income and you used to be in the communist countries, and yet you're like in the middle and slightly positive on subjective well-being. So it's not perfect, but I think they were trying to make a point when they put these outlines on to remind people where people came from and stuff like that, which gives you an impression that there might be sort of more to this than just measuring happiness. There might be something about trying to make some countries change their behaviors or things like that from the outside. So keep that in mind, that this might be in part a pressure campaign to get countries to change. One of the things that they were trying to emphasize is that it's about money. But if you rephrase how these cultures are sort of lined up, you might notice that those who have higher levels of free choice and more personal control tend to have higher subjective well-being. Now, it might not be that the law says that they don't get free choice and things like that. It could just be those are the cultural norms, or it could be that they aren't in the middle of some kind of civil war, and so there's more, free choice and personal control because there's not a civil war going on. It could be that they're having more free choice and personal control because there's a little bit more like movement within the culture. There's not like a caste system where you're stuck in certain roles or places. So the correlation between free choice and personal control is probably a stronger correlation and probably a more meaningful one than strictly the amount of money that's earned by that country. So I'm going to stick with money probably doesn't buy happiness. Probably happiness is being able to reach your full potential without like structural barriers. I think that's probably a really good alternative interpretation. Dunn et al. Conducted a study that gave the impression that maybe if you give away your money, that buys happiness. Maybe that money doesn't buy happiness, but being able to give money away might make you happy. They did 2 different studies in this report. One was a survey. And what they found in that survey was that self-reported happiness correlated with the amount of money that the person self-reported that they donate. So it was all people saying these things. Happiness did not correlate with the amount of money that the person earned. and it did not correlate with the amount of money that the person said they spent on themselves. It only correlated with the amount of money that they said they donated. So that caused Dunn et al. To design and conduct a study, an experiment where they could control some variables. Because obviously a survey, there's a lot of problems, right? Not only do I not have any control over what you're doing, I can't make half of the people donate a lot of money and half the people not, or something like that. So not only do we have that lack of control, but we also have lack of like confidence that people are reporting accurately to us. They say that they've donated this amount of money. They say they're this amount of happy. But are they? Are they this amount happy? Are they really donating this amount of money? So in the experiment, all the participants were given the same amount of cash, and they were assigned to either spend that cash on other people or spend that cash on themselves. And it was a fake kind of spending. It wasn't like they left the experiment with $5 in their pocket that they were either supposed to spend on someone else or like that. It was like, you can either spend the money on these things and it'll go to your peer who's participating in the study, or you can spend it on yourself and you can have that same thing for yourself. And those who were assigned to spend money on others scored higher on the happiness scale. So the inference is that, the same amount of money donated to someone else or being spent on someone else will give you more pleasure than it would if you spent it on yourself. That's the premise of that. Now, hopefully you're thinking some thoughts about this. Hopefully you're thinking, maybe the person didn't want the thing that they could buy at the experiment. And so giving it to somebody else made them feel good, and because they thought the other person was going to be happy with it, but they wouldn't have even wanted it for themselves. That's a confound. That's a problem, honestly, in this design. That's a problem. In real life, would you be happier buying someone else a really nice meal that you would love for yourself, but only one of you is getting it? Would you rather buy it for someone else, and that would make you more happy than if you got to, maybe you're driven by the hedonistic, you're like, no, I want to eat it. I think it's tough to do it in real life. I can see why Dunn et al. Did it in this sort of controlled experimental situation, because it's hard to do it in real life because there's so many other variables that you can't control. So we'll take this with a grain of salt. But you probably have had experiences in your own life where you have maybe sacrificed so that someone else could have something, or you bought gifts for people and you had a lot of pleasure in watching them open their gifts. And even though you got gifts that you liked, it didn't give you that same warm, happy, contented feeling that watching someone else appreciate the thing that you gave them gave you. I mean, like, we've all been in that experience. So I think this study makes sense. I also can see that you might be thinking, I have some skepticism about some of the, accuracy. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop here so that I don't go on too long, and we'll come back and talk about things that correlate with happiness.